You know how we argue about books or movies? How some of us get really into the moral message, while others are all about the style, the visuals, the artistry? Well, it turns out that's not just a random debate. It's actually the echo of a huge intellectual war that completely changed how we talk about literature about 100 years ago. Today, we're going to dive right into that battle.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll meet the old guard, the traditionalists who ran the show. Then we'll get into their core beliefs, this humanist crusade. After that, we meet the rebels who came to tear it all down. We'll see how all that chaos led to a totally new way of thinking. And finally, we'll talk about why this old fight still matters to us today.
Okay, so let's jump in our time machine and head back to the turn of the 20th century. In the world of literary criticism, there was a very clear establishment. These were the titans, the guys who set the rules and defined what good literature even was.
See, back then, talking about a book meant you were also talking about the author's life, what was happening in history at the time, or, just how the book made you feel. It was all mixed together. And you had these towering figures like A.C. Bradley in England, who wrote the literal book on Shakespeare, and Van Wyck Brooks over in America. These guys weren't just reviewers. They were more like cultural architects, really shaping how entire nations thought about their own stories.
And if you want to understand the single most powerful idea of that time, this is it. A.C. Bradley's take on Shakespeare and tragedy was huge. He didn't just see it as a sad story. No, for him, it was this epic, cosmic struggle. A hero messes with the moral order of the universe, and then the universe has to violently smack things back into place. It's this grand moral math, and it was the lens through which pretty much everyone saw great art.
So you might be wondering, why all this focus on morality? Well, that gets us to their fundamental mission, what you could call the humanist crusade. For these critics, a book wasn't just a book. It was a tool, it was a shield.
And this idea, which they got from the great Victorian critic Matthew Arnold, was absolutely central to everything they did. They genuinely believed the modern world was sick, that it was losing its soul, and that literature was the only medicine that could fix it. It was a safe house, a refuge from the chaos of modern life.
And what were these ills they were so afraid of? Well, they looked around and saw a world obsessed with money, a world that was becoming hostile to art, a world that blindly worshipped facts and science without any real wisdom. They felt like society was developing amnesia, totally forgetting its own past and traditions. For them, literature was the last fortress defending beauty, history, and moral truth.
But you know how it goes. Anytime you have a powerful establishment, a rebellion starts to bubble up. And what's so cool about this one is that the old guard wasn't just attacked from one direction. They were caught in a crossfire between two camps that couldn't have been more different.
This chart just lays out the battle lines so perfectly. On one side, you have the new humanists, who basically thought the old guard wasn't nearly conservative enough. And on the other, the neo-romantics, who thought the establishment was just a bunch of stuffy old guys killing the human spirit. They both wanted to tear down the old system, but for completely opposite reasons.
So let's look at the new humanists first. These guys, led by Irving Babbitt over at Harvard, were basically cultural crusaders. They saw the modern world's liberalism and its anything-goes attitude, and they were convinced society was on the brink of total collapse. Their answer? Go back. We need to get back to tradition and enforce some serious moral standards.
And then you have the polar opposite, the neo-romantics. People like the novelist D.H. Lawrence weren't looking for more rules. They wanted to break them all. They argued that logic, industry, and polite society had repressed our truest, most vital instincts. They said, forget reason, embrace the unconscious, embrace passion, embrace life.
And this rebellion was bigger than just a few leaders. It brought in all sorts of thinkers. You had scholars like G. Wilson Knight, who started analyzing Shakespeare by looking for patterns and symbols, not just character psychology. You even had C.S. Lewis, who was pushing for a return to the literature of the Middle Ages. Each one, in their own way, was chipping away at that old established model of criticism.
So you've got these attacks coming from both the conservatives and the radicals. The old ways just couldn't stand up to that kind of pressure. And out of all that conflict and chaos, something completely new was forged. A new and maybe even colder way of looking at literature.
Two really big ideas came out of the wreckage. First, the idea that we should just talk about art as art. Forget the author's biography, forget the moral lesson for society. Let's just focus on the thing itself, its form, its beauty, its aesthetic. And second, there was a big push to make criticism a serious, rigorous discipline, almost like a science with its own methods and standards.
And here's the crucial twist.
The critics found a brand new way to fight back against that modern world they hated so much. If the old humanists used literature as a moral shield, these new critics started using the aesthetic as a shield. The pure, complex beauty of the art itself became the new refuge from a world they saw as ugly and dehumanizing.
Now, this intellectual war pretty much set the stage for the next 50 years of literary theory. But here's the thing, its echoes are still with us. This wasn't just some dusty old academic debate. It's a battle that, in many ways, we are all still fighting today.
Because this is what's so fascinating. Even as criticism tried to become more scientific and focused only on the art itself, that old humanist impulse, that need to find meaning and morality and value in what we read, it never really went away. It just went underground, sometimes even shaping the arguments of the very people who claimed they were rejecting it.
And that brings us right back to where we started, with this fundamental question. Think about it. When you praise a film because it has an important social message, you're channeling those old humanists. When you praise it for its incredible cinematography or its clever script, you're channeling the aesthetes. This century-old conflict between meaning and form isn't over. It plays out every single time we argue about what makes a piece of art good.